Our digestive system is this incredible superhighway that's constantly working to fuel our bodies. But what happens when you get a traffic jam or a roadblock? Well, today we're going to take a journey right through our own anatomy to see what can go wrong and, maybe more importantly, how we can keep everything running smoothly. I mean, we've all been there, right? That little bit of heartburn, an upset stomach, or just that feeling that something is a bit off. It's something pretty much everyone experiences, and it's a direct signal from a system that is just so central to our well-being.
So, check this out. This is basically our roadmap for today. It's called the alimentary canal, which is really just a fancy way of saying it's one long tube that runs all the way from the mouth to the other end. And its job, really, is pretty simple, but so vital. First, break down food into fuel the body can actually use, and second, get rid of all the waste.
All right, so in this explainer, we're going to follow the exact path your food takes. We'll start at the very beginning and go all the way to the end, stopping at a few key spots to see what kinds of trouble can pop up. Okay, so our journey starts, naturally, right at the entrance, the mouth. This is where the whole process of digestion really kicks off. And yep, it's also where our first potential problems can show up. So if you look at our map, we are right here at the very top. And the mouth is so much more than just where you taste your food. It's literally the gateway to the entire GI tract. So one of the biggest issues right at the start is something called periodontal disease. This is what affects all the stuff that supports your teeth. And get this, it's actually the #1 cause of tooth loss in adults. But here's the crucial part. It's often caused by things we can totally control, like not-so-great oral hygiene or a diet that leads to inflamed gums, which you might know as gingivitis.
And the good news? The solution is actually pretty straightforward. Your best defense is just simple prevention. We're talking about consistent brushing and flossing, getting regular dental checkups, and eating a decent balanced diet. I mean, these are really simple habits, but they have a massive payoff.
Now, on a more serious note, there's mouth cancer. The most common type is called squamous cell carcinoma, and it's a cancer of those thin, flat cells lining your mouth. It actually shows up a lot on the lower lip, and the risk factors are really clear. Things like too much sun exposure, using chewing tobacco, and of course, smoking.
Okay, let's head to our next stop. From the mouth, we're traveling down the food pipe, the esophagus. And down here, a whole different set of pressures can create a new list of problems. Right, here we are on our map, the esophagus. It's just a muscular tube that connects your throat to your stomach. Its only job is to get food from point A to point B. But believe me, it's not always a smooth ride.
Now, I'm willing to bet a lot of us are familiar with this one. GERD, or, acid reflux. It's that lovely experience when stomach acid flows back up into the esophagus, giving you that classic burning feeling we call heartburn. And look, while it's super common, if it happens all the time, that chronic reflux can actually do some serious damage.
But GERD isn't the only thing that can go wrong here. The next condition is, well, it's pretty fascinating actually, because it shows this surprising chain reaction. It connects a problem in the esophagus all the way back to a completely different organ, and it all ties back to our daily habits. Okay, so this condition is called esophageal varices. Basically, it's when the veins inside your esophagus get all enlarged and twisted, kind of like varicose veins, but on the inside. The real danger here is that they can burst, and that can cause some really life-threatening bleeding. So what causes this? Well, think of it like a traffic jam in your bloodstream. When the blood flow trying to get into the liver gets blocked, the blood has to find a detour, right? So it backs up into these smaller veins in the esophagus, and that's what makes them swell up. And the most common reason for that blockage? Something called cirrhosis, which is just severe scarring of the liver. Which brings us to the final domino in this whole chain reaction. So what's the most common cause of that liver cirrhosis to begin with? Yep, excessive alcohol consumption. I mean, this is just a perfect, if scary, example of how one single lifestyle choice can set off this dangerous domino effect, starting in the liver and ending with a potentially fatal problem in the esophagus. All right, let's keep moving down our superhighway to the main processing plant, the stomach. This is where food gets churned up and broken down by some pretty powerful acids, which, as you can imagine, makes it a pretty common spot for irritation and other issues. So, back to our map. We've officially arrived at the stomach. Just think of it as this muscular bag that's constantly being exposed to super strong acids and, well, everything we decide to eat and drink.
Okay, so this is a really interesting one, because it busts a super common myth.
You know how we always blame stress or spicy food for stomach ulcers? Well, the reality is the vast majority of them are actually caused by a specific kind of bacteria called H. pylori. Now, sure, other things like aspirin, smoking, or alcohol can definitely weaken the stomach's protective lining and make things worse, but this little bacteria, it's usually the main culprit.
And when we talk about stomach cancer, the risk factors, again, point right back to our lifestyle choices. Cigarette smoking is a huge one, and so is a diet that's really high in foods that are smoked, heavily salted, or pickled. The thinking is that these things can just irritate the stomach lining over and over again over time.
All right, we are now on the final leg of our journey. Leaving the stomach, we're heading into the long, winding tubes of the small and large intestines. This is where the final, critical acts of digestion and absorption happen.
And here we are on the map, this whole dense network. This is where the body does its final, crucial job. First, it's the small intestine, which is all about absorbing those key nutrients. Then, it's onto the large intestine, which absorbs water before, the waste is eliminated.
So in this final, pretty complex section, you can really have two types of problems, functional or structural. So a key functional problem is something called malabsorption syndrome. That's when the lining of the small intestine gets damaged and it just can't do its main job, absorbing nutrients. And without that, you can have some serious complications, like bleeding problems because you're not getting enough vitamin K. So that's a problem with how it works. Then you have structural problems, like an inguinal hernia. This is literally when part of your intestine pushes through a weak spot in your abdominal muscles and creates a bulge. Think of it like a plumbing problem, not a processing problem.
So, after our entire trip down the GI superhighway, what's the big takeaway? Let's boil everything we've just talked about down into a simple, practical guide for your digestive health.
Here it is. Think of this as the owner's manual for your gut, and you're going to notice a pattern here. It all comes back to consistent, pretty simple choices. We're talking good oral hygiene, eating a balanced diet, avoiding those big irritants like tobacco and too much alcohol, and maybe cutting back on the smoked and heavily salted foods. And maybe the biggest one of all, listen to your body. Don't just ignore things like persistent heartburn.
Look, your digestive system literally never takes a day off. It is working 24/7 to support you. So after everything we've just covered, what's one small change you could make, starting right now, today, to help it do its job a little bit better?